Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to our March edition of the ABA Engineering Academy webinar that we have each month. And we want to invite you to contact your other people that may be interested in joining us on the webinar today. A couple of things we wanted to cover right quick, like before we get into the program, is that we have, as most of you probably know, we have actually increase the number of classes that we have at the ABA Engineering Academy. We normally have 2 sessions during the year, but because of the influx of students we've had signing up, we've actually added another session in the summer. Our next class coming up will be in a couple of weeks, April 3rd through the 7th, which will be for television. And then we'll do another round of classes for radio and television. I think the radio class is scheduled the week of August 21st. And I'm sorry, June 12th is radio, and the TV is August 21st. You can go to the ABA website, which is simply al-ba.com, and click on engineering, and you'll see all the dates. And we've updated the information concerning the classes. It actually shows what we actually go through during the classes and everything that we cover. One thing we want to make sure that you know that we are underwritten by Max Connect Group, Josh Bond and his crew. This is a full service broadcast operation offering sales and service to broadcast operations, and they handle the Max Connect unit. If you haven't seen the Max Connect unit, I encourage you to visit their website and take a look at it. It's a rather unique device that uses for audio over IP for remotes and backup STLs using a dedicated IP service. So we appreciate Max Connect Group being part of it. And I want to turn it over to our co-host, who is somewhere over in South Carolina today, which, by the way, the Academy and this webinar is sort of a co-venture of the Alabama, Georgia, and the South Carolina Broadcast Association. And John is with the South Carolina broadcasters over there. And John, I think you've got a few comments about EAS to start with.
Yeah, it seems to be the monthly occurrences, discussion about FEMA and EAS tests that are supposed to go out on Monday mornings at 11 o'clock in your particular time zone. An email went out this morning that gives a rundown of the past 2 months, February and March, of what tests were sent out normally and what weren't. And just for your own information, February 27th through this past Monday, they have not had any tests that made it through to EAS units. The RWTs that went out on February 27th, March the 6th, and 13th all had invalid signatures, and they were assured us that they were going to correct the certificate by this Monday, the 20th, and no test went out and no reason for why that test did not go out. So the main thing you need to do is note in your station log for those occurrences that you did not receive February 27th through 20th, that you did not receive a test from FEMA. You could say due to technical issues or a test not received, but it does need to be noted in your station log. And hopefully, maybe next Monday, we'll have a test from them. So just keep a close eye on that. Because you don't want to get into a rule situation as such. And Larry, I'll turn it over to you because I sure don't want to take any time away from good friend John Bisset and his presentation today.
That's exactly right. And what we would like to do is remind everybody that this particular webinar, as well as all the past webinars that we've done over the past several years, is actually archived on our YouTube site. Just go to YouTube and search for ABA Engineering Academy, and you'll see not only the archive monthly webinars that we do, but there's a number of videos up there that we've done. John and I did a couple of classes for ABIP several years ago, and looks like we're going to try to schedule. I haven't talked to you yet about this, John, but I've had some requests from several people. Are y'all going to do another BIP training session anytime soon? So we may have to try to put that together. Okay, you must have muted your
Yeah, I
audio.
said, yeah, I'd be happy to work with you on it.
Okay. All right. So let's go and introduce our guest today, John Bisset, who has been working for years putting out uh, the broadcast radio workshop, in which he has all kind of tips and techniques that the engineers present to him. And John, first of all, I want to welcome you to the program. And I got one question that we'll get started with here. How did you actually start doing the workshop?
Well, we'll go back a little bit further because it brings up another point I'd like to make today. I started out wanting to be in TV and was on the Bozo show when I was about 7 years old, and seeing all those cameras and all that stuff, something just clicked. It's like, man, this is for me. Moved over into radio, had a pirate radio station in my attic as a kid, and then got a full-time job working as a DJ and then an announcer at a beautiful music station. The problem was, Larry, is that back then, this was in the early 70s, I guess, the jobs for the announcers were not very stable. My friends were always getting fired, and I figured, gee whiz, this is not the kind of career that, if you want a long-term relationship with an organization, you're not going to find it as a DJ. So I noticed that they never fired the engineer. Well, isn't it interesting how times change? But the point is that with the desire for the technical side of things, I got into engineering and then moved on from that. Radio World, which is the publication that has the Workbench column, is located in Falls Church, right down the street from where I was working, and got to form a real close relationship with the owner of the company. And we were talking about at that time, it was called the Broadcast Equipment Exchange. You may remember that. It was a kind of a classified for broadcast equipment, people wanting to buy and sell gear. And he put a little bit of news in there, and then it started to grow. And he approached me about doing some kind of a technical column. That was 50 years ago. It's kind of hard to believe. I mean, it's pretty crazy that the time has gone by for doing the column. But it's been something that has been sustained because of all of the people that have subscribed and put tips into the column. It's not all me. The submissions that readers send in are really, really great, and it's a really neat opportunity for people to be able to help their fellow engineers, which is really a neat thing. The other thing that's a positive from it is you get SBE credit. So if you're certified, your certification has to be renewed every few years. And if you are published in a national or international trade publication, such as Radio World, you'll get SBE credit for that. So I'd encourage you to send tips to me. The email address is real simple: JOHN, the letter P as in Paul, BISSET @gmail.com. So if you have something, pictures are always encouraged, especially weird things that people find at the transmitter site. I know you and John both have seen a lot of things like that. And, it's just fun to share those pictures of experiences that engineers have had.
I'm pretty sure you're not still involved in pirate radio. I guess you saw the other day where the commission offered like a $2 million fine for a pilot station up in New York.
Well, and when I say a pirate station, I got to be fair. It was one of those little Lafayette wireless receivers that it transmitted about 2 blocks. So it was legitimate. But, hey, pirate radio sounds cool. So, it was kind of fun. And we even had the local 7-Eleven around the corner as a sponsor. So, it was a neat way to break into the industry. But Larry, that brings up a good point, though. I just did a webinar for SBE on "So You're Fired, What Do You Do Now?" And if you have not seen that, or if you are in a position where you need to look for a job, the subject matter is really appropriate. And it will help engineers that are riffed or past having their positions eliminated or whatever the case may be, to be able to get back on their feet. So that's something that is available through the SBE website.
That's great. That's great. I know that with the changing technology, everything is changing so rapidly. Engineers still find a lot of tips and a lot of techniques that they do. And I know that's what you got a bag full that you'd like to share with us this morning.
Sure, I'd like to. And let me point out one other thing, too, with regard to this this SBE webinar. This is not a technical webinar. It kind of gets off into something completely different, and that is looking for a job and what do you do if you lose your job. But there's also some tips in there on how to hold on to your job. And I'd like to start off with that real quick. Probably the biggest mistake that we make as engineers is not promoting ourselves, and we don't let our management know where we are or what we're doing. I know John can relate to this from his years of sales. I can't tell you how many owners and managers I've talked to that say, I don't know what my engineer does. I have no idea where he is. I don't know what he's doing. And it's a point of real frustration. And here's what ends up happening. So you're doing a good job doing maintenance, keeping the stations on the air. The manager, on the other hand, is being tasked with cutting costs. And he sees this big engineering salary out there. And he says, well, gee, the station's never off the air. I never see the engineer. I don't know what he's doing. We're just going to get rid of him. And unfortunately, that's the thinking by a lot of these guys. And what's really bad is when that happens, the station will run along fine for 6 months. But then with no maintenance, no work whatsoever, the whole thing implodes. And, it's a real problem. So I discussed in this webinar things that you can do to keep your management informed of where you're going. And I'll share one of them right now that was always very helpful for me. If I ever had a call in the middle of the night or on the weekend, I would leave voicemail for the manager, the program director, the operations director, and let them know, hey, it's 3 a.m. and I'm fixing a problem at the transmitter site. It's 2 on a Sunday afternoon and I'm at the transmitter doing this, or I'm at the studio doing that. They had no idea where I was until they get this voicemail. And the thought that goes through their mind is, well, better him at 2 a.m. than me or somebody else. And, so the point is that you need to keep your management aware of what you're doing and just make them aware that, you're not going down to the transmitter site to take a nap. That's where the pictures of what you find down there, the snakes in the ATUs and the bees' nests in the satellite dish and things like that, come in real handy. We had a area in the lunchroom where I would post pictures of things that we found down at the transmitter site. And it's not just for you, but if you have an assistant, promote that assistant as well. As I say, these managers are under a tremendous amount of pressure to reduce costs. And if they think that they can get away with getting rid of the engineer, gosh, we've seen in the trades what's been going on. I mean, it's absolutely insane, and it will happen. So the point is that you make sure that you're protecting yourself by informing your management of what you're doing, projects you're working on, things that are happening, just making everyone around the station realize, gee, I don't want to be down there working on a transmitter or going to a transmitter site in the swamp or whatever and having to deal with it. And that is one other thing, Larry. I went down one time with my general manager. and we had an old RCA firebox. Now, those of you that don't know about this transmitter, when those things would arc, flames would shoot out the top of the thing. And we had that situation. I hit that played on button and the flame shot out. That manager shot out of that building so fast, he would not come back in it. But boy, I sure earned some respect after that, because, it's just one of those things where these guys don't know what you're doing, and they need to know, and you need to be able to just continue to educate them on what you're doing.
Yeah, I attended a seminar a while back in which it was actually a pro audio seminar, but the presenter actually gave the 3 top traits of an engineer, what they should develop. And the top one, believe it or not, was to become a people person, be able to communicate with the other people in the facility there, general manager all the way down. So you're exactly right on that.
Well,
All right.
Larry, that's a good point too, because a lot of people choose engineering because it's a solo field. You do your thing, you work with the machines, you don't have to interact with other people. But it's not necessarily interacting with them. You just need to keep them advised of what's going on.
That's exactly right. Well, what good tips and techniques do you have for us today to make our job much easier?
Well, a bunch of different things. If you like to fool around on the internet, I suggest that you get on there and go for Google the remote endoscope, ENDOSCOPE. It's about a $20 endoscope that is plugs into your smartphone. And what's fun with this is, especially with the higher power, older transmitters, trying to get inside a cavity and see what's going on behind components. This endoscope has about a 6-foot long lead that connects up to it, and it displays a picture on your smartphone. So you can drop the camera, the lighted camera, down into a hole or into the back of a transmitter, of course, with it off and everything shorted out. But you can see things that you wouldn't normally be able to see. And even with a cell phone, that a cell phone may not be able to get back in there. But this little remote endoscope, and gosh, for $20, maybe 25 when you figure shipping, that's a small investment to pay for an extra pair of eyes that can get into places where you're not able to see things.
Oh yeah, that would have been real handy. There was at one time I had a Continental transmitter that had there was a capacitor that was bad, and I couldn't find it. I didn't know where it was, and I finally found it. It was way up in the stack above the tube, and I had to fill up in there. And I said, "Oh, there it is, stuck way up in the stack." So something like that would have been real handy to be able to see it.
Well, yeah, and I guess in that case, Larry, it probably cracked. Is that how you felt the edges of the broken ceramic?
That's correct. I kept seeing it on the schematic. I said, "Well, where in the heck is that thing?" And so I didn't find it. My assistant found it because he had smaller arms than I had, and he felt up in there and he said, "Oh, I found it, and yeah, it's cracked. I can feel it." So an endoscope would have been valuable in that situation.
Well, the neat thing is that it's so inexpensive. I mean, yeah, you can get an endoscope for $1,000, I'm sure, but to have something that is $25, I mean, that's chump change these days, and all you need is to be able to use it once. Troy brought out a good point just a minute ago that cell phones are probably the best invention for engineers. I think it's really true. The pagers are gone; we can communicate on them, but those cameras are just amazing. And they really are helpful. So yeah, take plenty of pictures. Now, how you organize them is a whole nother story. That's a little difficult, but make sure you snap pictures of things that are unusual and post them at the radio or TV station.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I try to do that even on inspections. When I go around to inspections, I make plenty of pictures, and I have them and put those in my files and everything.
Well, and Larry, that's a good point. Talking about inspections for those who do contract engineering, one of the things that I like to say in some of the presentations I've done is to protect yourself, because we're in a very litigious society now, and if somebody can throw something at you and sue you, they certainly will do it. We had a situation where we were called out to a radio station that was off the air. The engineer, or the previous engineer, quit. And the owner got in touch with me and went out there, and he met me at the transmitter site. It turned out the tube was bad. And he said, well, we got lots of tubes over here. And there were boxes, maybe about 10 boxes of 4CX 15,000 tubes that were sitting there. And he opened up the first one, it was empty. Opened up the second one, it was empty. Every one of those boxes was empty. And what had happened was the previous engineer hadn't been paid. He took all of those tubes and sent them to a Conco and got the dud credit for it to pay his bill. Now, I'm not saying that's right, but you can imagine what would have happened if this manager thought that all these tubes were there and I showed up by myself and it's like, well, there are no tubes there. Who is he going to blame? He's going to blame me. I was the last one there. So taking pictures of stations when you go around, especially if you start with contract engineering, what I would do, and this is a neat way to make a little money extra with it, is to take your camera and offer to do an inspection for them. You guys were talking about the APIB inspections. Walk around. If you see things that are problems, take pictures of them, write a little report with Word documents, real easy to import pictures, and give him a report, charge him a few $100s for it. And he's got a list of FCC potential violations, but he's also, it's protecting you because he can't come back later and say, oh, well, that happened under this guy's watch, so we're going to go after him, especially if he gets an FCC fine. So, the contract engineering is a great job and really need to be your own boss, but you got to be careful and you got to protect yourself.
On the techniques that you get in, or the tips that you get from other people, do a lot of them have to do with safety situations at transmitter sites, or do you see many of those?
Yeah, we do, and that's a real good point. As you guys know, with the alternative inspection program, safety is about the only thing the FCC has teeth to bite anymore. I mean, they if there's a safety problem, they're going to be on top of it. And I would say probably the biggest thing is tower fences coming down. We had a station, a directional station, that was built in a floodplain, and the owner, he was about 80 years old, and he came in and did the morning show every morning. I mean, it was a real local radio station, really pretty cool. And he had these fences built around his towers, and unfortunately got an inspection. And we went out to the tower site, and two of the fences had been knocked down because of the floods. They came through every spring. And the inspector said, well, you need to replace these fences. And the guy says, I will not. And I'm sitting there saying, oh my gosh, what's going to happen here? So he says, I'm not going to replace them until after flood season, because if I replace them, they're going to be knocked down again by the water. And the FCC inspector decided to try a different tact. He said, well, what would happen if some little kid walked up and touched that tower and was electrocuted? And this guy got right in the face of the FCC, and he said, well, he'd never do it again, would he? He did get the fences replaced and he avoided a fine. But, the point is the safety is really important, and you've got to be careful about that.
John George always had a really good story. I don't know if he's has muted here or not, about making sure this is not actually part of an inspection as far as the records are concerned, but safety goes a long way. Not putting the panel covers back on a distribution panel. John, if you're still on with us, you might want to comment on that, because he had a real funny story about a station that he went to one time that the panel was not on. He may have gone to get another cup of coffee.
Well,
Yeah.
we'll see if he gets back on. Definitely. Larry, there was another comment while I was talking. I didn't see it. Did you read that one?
Oh, let me see here. No, I didn't. Let me.
And thank you guys for making your comments. This is really neat to have it be interactive, so we can talk about things that interest you.
Oh, yeah. I was looking through here. I just did you see it?
Yeah. Let me see if what I've got here. Oh, here we go. Okay, this is from Ray Lewis. He says, I have a need for a boroscope that will get inside small spaces with an articulating head. Any suggestions? Ray, I think probably that that endoscope is going to be the best thing. I haven't seen anything that will give you the ability to actually move the head once it's inside there. But you'd be able to point this thing down into whatever it is that you're looking and possibly twist the wires around to be able to get some information that way.
Yeah, you must have turned your camera off. Because I got a nice picture of you with your coat and tie on.
Let me see if I can get that back.
There you go. There you go. What other good tips and techniques do you have for us today?
Well, I think one of the other things you were talking about, safety, it's a good idea to take a trip around your transmitter site at least once a month. And especially with good weather coming up here now, I mean, it's a great time to go out and just do a cursory inspection of everything. Make sure that the fences are secure, make sure that locks are in place, that the locks are working, and make sure that you've got the air conditioning serviced, that we're okay with that, so that the air conditioning system is functioning properly. It's really important to have this information tested, have it tested on a regular basis, and then make sure that it's maintained. So whether you're doing the maintenance yourself, replacing the filters, cleaning the condenser coils and that sort of thing, or if you've got someone who is contracted to come do it, it's a good idea to do that.
Yeah, site inspections, I think, is something I push every time I visit a station. And like you say, once a month or at least once a quarter, do a site survey, walk around. And as one guy told me, he said, walk around the tower to see if there's something on the ground that's not supposed to be there, such as bolts or spring hangers and stuff that way. Because I had a station down in Pensacola at one time. We went out to it, and there was a TV on there and some FMs. And in the side inspections of walking around, there was a couple of spring hangers laying on the ground. And that was a real big plus right there. That would get you thinking, where did those spring hangers come from? Well, obviously, they broke off of some of the harnesses up there. So, and I always encourage people to go and look at all the guy anchors to make sure there's not rusty or things have come loose, or the ice breakers are not bad. And so I actually did go to one time where it was a 1,200-foot tower, so it had two guy points. But when I got out to the outer guy point, I noticed that the grounding wire from all four guy wires in between 2 and 3 was broke, and it was just sprangled out. And the guy said, "Oh, somebody cut my grounding." I said, "No, that if somebody cut it, it would be a straight cut. This was sprangled out, like my hair used to be when I used to have hair." I said, "That's a metal fatigue." I said, "Those guy wires whipping back and forth and all, it just finally, like, you can take a coat hanger and bend it several times and
Just
it'll
keep
break in
bending
two."
it.
So
Exactly.
this is what happens. So, and you wouldn't have known it if you hadn't have done a site inspection.
It's a really good point. And you mentioned grounding. There is a product called Wet Dry. It's wet and then the letter R and then dry. It's made by Gardner Gardner. It is like a roofing tar type cement. And if you paint your ground strap with that, two things happen. First off, a thief will not see the copper ground strap and then be encouraged to cut it. Second, if he does cut it and takes it to a reclamation center, they won't accept it because you can't get this stuff off. Once it dries on there, it is solid. And ground strap with any kind of compound on it makes it impossible for them to reclaim it. So it's a good idea to invest in that. Slather that on at the base of the tower on the copper strap, again with the transmitter off, because if you've got a series fed tower, you know that thing's going to be hot. You want to go ahead and cover your ground strap with this. Another thing that's a neat idea, especially with spring coming up here, that we go ahead and take care of the issue of weeds and brambles and things like that love to grow inside the tower fence. If you don't have pea gravel or some kind of gravel inside there to retard the growth of weeds, you need to do something like that, or get hardware cloth, which is a black cloth that you can buy at the big box stores or at a nursery, and spread that out underneath the tower, cover it with the gravel. That will prevent weeds from growing up into the pea gravel, and gives you just a nice flat surface underneath the tower itself, and it'll also protect your ground straps that you have coming down from the pier of the tower.
Yeah, I've seen people also, once they do that and they put the gravel on top, and of course the gravel, I've always figured out the gravel's there just to hold down the landscape cloth. But sometimes, dirt and all will fall, get on the gravel, and birds will come by with seeds and all, and you could get some growth right in the gravel itself. And you can, what a lot of people do will go and get I forget what it's called, Weed Be Gone or something like that you can just sprinkle on the gravel, and will stop those seeds, bird droppings and everything from growing, and that'll keep it from coming up in the ground. Now there's some weeds, I know we have some here in where I live, but I don't really know what they'll grow anywhere. As a matter of fact, my next door neighbor said, that type of weed will grow in asphalt. So sometimes it's just hard to do it.
Well, and one of the things that's nice is if you do cover the cloth with the pea gravel or any kind of stone, what's nice about it is that if a weed does start to grow, it's not going to go down through the hardware cloth, so it's really easy to pull out, and you're not going to have a tree growing up underneath the tower. The problem with that, we had an instance where an operations manager, and he didn't know any better. And here's another example of what happens. They let the engineer go and they put somebody in place who really shouldn't be doing what they were doing. He went out there and he pulled up all of the trees, the saplings that were growing underneath the tower, and ripped up the entire ground system, because that's where all the radials came in. They were all buried underground. The weeds got all wrapped around the radials and he ripped them all off. I mean, it was an absolute mess, and it cost him several $1,000s to correct it. So, you look at that and it's like, okay, on the one hand, we're saving money because we don't have an engineer. But on the other hand, we've got somebody who has come along and taken care of doing something that he thought was helpful, and it turned out it was not.
Oh yeah, that could really be a problem. When you were talking about looking at the guy anchors and all a while ago, it brought to mind that I actually found out. I went and talked to some people that was involved in NATE, and I forget what it stands for. It has to do with towers and guy wire installations. And I asked them what the normal radius was that you trim trees and bushes back from a guy path. And he said it was 50 feet either side and 50 feet behind the outer guy. You want to make sure there's nothing growing up that will actually fall over the guy wire. So now I know that's that's 100-foot wide slot, but if you're going to do it right, that's what they recommend is 50 feet either side of the guy path. and 50 feet behind the outer guy. The
That's
same
a, that's
guy
a,
told me something that I saw a guy, it wasn't a guy anchor, it was actually the tower base that had cracks in the cement. And they told me, and you might want to put this in your notes and use it in your workbench, the best way to do those is not pour wet concrete in there, but to take the dry concrete and put it down on where the crack is and take a brush and brush the dry concrete down in the crack, then take your water and put it in there. Because if you just try to pour wet concrete, it may not make it all the way down in the concrete where the crack is. But if you put the dry stuff, it'll fall all the way down to the bottom. And once you
sure.
really fill it up, then you can wet that down and it'll solidify, and that'll help seal up cracks in it.
That's a really good idea. That's great. Yeah, Larry, the just all the things that need to be done around the transmitter site is important, and unfortunately, it's sort of out of sight, out of mind. The equipment has gotten so reliable these days that we don't really have a need to go there. But at least once a month, just take some time. Go stop by a fast food place, get your lunch, and take it down to the transmitter site and enjoy it. We had a situation a number of years ago in one of the real early webinars that I did, where the station had not done anything about clearing any of the trees, and there was the actual tree that had grown around a guy anchor, and they had gone and cut the tree, so you had the guy anchor guy wire coming up from the ground and a big log that was around the center of it, where the log, I mean, this thing was probably not quite 10 inches in diameter. So this had happened for a long, long time. It just didn't happen overnight. And, yet at the same time, it's like, gosh, the things that I think we see as engineers are really pretty amazing. How equipment even operates, how that tower even was still standing, having this 30, 40, 50-pound log hanging onto the guy wire. So it's really miraculous, but at the same time, it really drives home the point that we do need to make periodic inspections.
We typically tell when I'm doing inspections, I typically suggest to stations that they visit the tower site once a week if possible, because things can change in a week's time. And someone told us one time there's three things that you need to learn about your transmitter site, and that is the look at the site, the smell of the site, and the sound of the site. And once you make regular visits out there, you can walk in the door and know immediately something's not right. You may smell something overheating, a resistor or something like that. You may hear a whine of a bearing going bad in a blower motor or something. And you know what it looks like when you drive up if something's happened around. So those three things that you should get once you start visiting on a regular basis, that sort of gets in your mind. And and I'll tell you a story that I had at one of the sites we had two towers. There was a regular tower that we used to be on, and then we moved over and built a new tower and put a panel antenna and all this kind of stuff. But the old tower is still there with renters on it. There's actually a non-com FM up on the top. And normally when I would drive up and coming down the road and get out to unlock the gate, just out of habit, I would look up the towers. Just, you know, not to see if they're still there, but just to see if everything looks okay. And I noticed on the old tower there was something moving around up towards the top of the tower. And I said, "What is that?" So I got my binoculars out of the truck and I looked, and this tower went from I think it was 36-inch down to 24 with a plate at the top. And what had happened, the brackets had broke on the heliax right there at the transition point, and it was swinging back and forth with the wind. So I told the renter whose antenna it was, and he got a tower guy out, and it didn't like, but just a tiny bit cutting through all the way through that heliax because it was rubbing. So be conscious when you drive up and look and look around and see what make sure people are not dumping trash and all that kind of stuff on your side, or they haven't cut a hole in the fence or whatever. Just be observant, I guess is the word.
I think that's a really good idea. And, in looking at maintenance on things, I'd like your 2 cents worth too, Larry, on filters. The fact that we don't get to transmitter sites as often as we used to, using the high efficiency pleated air filters are a good idea because it will help to keep things clean. Remember, dirt is going to be probably the biggest enemy that you're going to have. And if you're sucking in all of this garbage from outside, especially with pollen season and bugs and things like that, because you've got either no filtering or just very cheap furnace filters, you're going to be stuck with having to do a lot of cleaning inside the transmitter itself to keep everything nice and clean.
Yeah, there's actually an article that would, and it may have appeared in Radio World, I'm not sure, but there was actually a link to an article that some air conditioning company had posted about the different type of filters and which one will allow a certain percentage of air to go through and which actually traps smaller particles. And one of the interesting things I think I got from that article was that a lot of people do a two-stage filtering. They'll have one type of filter actually in the wall where the air is coming, if you're pulling in outside air, and then another type of filter actually in the piece of equipment, in the transmitter or whatever, and they're doing two different jobs. One is stopping the big particles from coming in, and then letting a lot of air in, and then the one in the transmitter is getting smaller particles. But
that's a good idea. And that works out real well, and it does help to keep the transmitter clean.
We always we used to write down on the filters the date that we put them in, and even if they didn't look dirty after so many weeks or whatever, we would automatically change them out. Because you're right, airflow is the most important thing, especially in transmitters. You just got to they're going to generate heat, whether it's a tube type or solid state, they're going to generate heat. And so if you can move that heat away from the components, then you've increased the lifetime quite a bit. And that's why filters are so important. And sometimes I've been to sites, and I kid you not, that the filter looked like a piece of plywood. I mean, it was so clogged up with dust and dirt. It was terrible.
And see, that's coming back to the point I made, that it's so hard to realize that the equipment can even still operate when you've got a filter that is clogged like that. Yeah, it's pretty amazing. Larry, I don't know how many folks have had encounters with rodents, especially mice. After the winter that we just had, they love transmitter sites, and they will do their darndest to find a way inside. I wanted to tell you about another product that is really helpful. It's called Mouse Magic, and it's a little packet that I think there are two or four packets in a box, and it's a sweet-smelling, peppermint-smelling type compound in there that the mice hate. It smells good to engineers. It'll make your transmitter site smell good, but laying some of these down on the floor inside racks and even inside the transmitters, probably not a bad idea if you have problems with rodents getting into your building. Really smart to try to correct that as far as the openings of where they're getting in. We used to take either a flashlight or some of the old ATUs had a light bulb socket inside. We turn the light on at night with the station off the air, and then walk around the ATU and look through the cabinet and see if light was escaping anywhere. And sure as you go, there's going to be a door that doesn't fit properly, or a hole that somebody used for something else and they didn't plug it back up, and it becomes an instant welcome sign for mice to come in and start messing with your equipment, and literally messing with it. So if you see rodent pellets all over from the little black pellets showing that you've got mice in your transmitter building, pick up some of these Mouse Magic packets, and also a mask don't clean that stuff up without protection. The viruses that can be transmitted through mouse fecal matter is just unbelievable, and you don't want to end up getting sick. There's some very severe respiratory ailments that you can get from breathing that stuff. So, and same thing is true with a vacuum cleaner. Sucking it up, the vacuum's going to suck it up, but they're also going to be expelling air out the backside of the vacuum. You don't want to be breathing that. So make sure that you've got a mask, use gloves, clean everything up, and then make sure you've got the little Mouse Magic packets or mothballs. Those will work for snakes and sometimes for mice. But I found this Mouse Magic is made by a company called Bonide, Bonide. They are a garden store supplier. They provide fertilizers and things like that. But this is the best stuff I've ever found. It's reasonably priced. It'll last maybe a month or so, couple of months, and it will clear the buildings or the ATU cabinets of mice very, very quickly.
Funny you mentioned that about the peppermint candy. Last year, we had a problem where because of some neighbors that moved out and stuff that way, we had a sort of a mouse infection in the neighborhood, and they actually got into our car and ate up the vacuum hoses on the gas tank. And it was quite expensive, to get that. We had to replace the whole gas tank because the hoses are actually, it's one of these cars where they use the emission control and they reclaim some of the fumes and reburn it again. Well, the mice had actually got in and ate up those hoses back there. And so they had to replace it. And the mechanic, and I thought about that when you said that, the mechanic told me, he said, "No, when you get home, go and get you some peppermint candy and crush it up and throw it under where you park your car, because said mice will they don't particularly like that smell."
No, they don't. You're right. They don't. Larry, we got another comment here from Sam Hunter saying, what do you do in a situation where a representative from a cell phone company shows up at your station and says you're interfering with their cell service? What would you do?
Boy, that has really gotten to be, and maybe John will get back on and talk about this as well. That's been a real big problem, and I'll tell you my take on that, John, is that and I'm not belittling the cell phone company, but their spectrum analyzers that they use are actually they overload real easy. And the stuff that they see may not be, but see, if you do your due diligence and you check and make sure that you're within the mask and you're any harmonics or anything like that is below the 80 dB that you're supposed to have, then by FCC rules, you're okay. Now, if they come in and say that it's interfering, then that's something. Now, I do know, and I see John with us here, I do know that you can appease them sometime if you think you've got radiation coming from the transmitter. They actually make a paint, I understand now, that has copper embedded into the paint. And if you can get them to pay for it, get the cell company to pay for it, you can actually paint the inside of your transmitter building with this, and it acts sort of like a shield. John, I see you back on. You have any comments on that?
Yeah, I've been through a couple of situations with cell phone companies. One which happened to be T-Mobile, and it was at a mountaintop site, which about every frequency on the face of the earth was being transmitted or received at that point. And they, for some reason, decided that the local FM there was causing the issue. And they actually went to the trouble of purchasing seventh harmonic filters. And they bought two of them because there were two stations at the site, and it didn't really resolve their issue, and they no longer complained. Now, I had another site, which happened to be AT&T, and they dug their heels in. It was a tube type transmitter, and it was right on the ragged edge of 80 dB down. So technically it was legal, but they weren't satisfied. And what happens in a lot of these cell sites, they run their receivers wide open. So if they get any kind of interference, they're going after whoever's interfering. it took us a while. We actually had spectrum analyzer out there, set up antenna on that particular frequency about 20 feet away from the building, and did measurements that way. And we found out that the rebuilt tube that the station was using caused the issue. But in that case, AT&T had equipment that was set up at the cell site about a half a mile away that they could actually monitor remotely. And I will say they were more than cooperative with us and working with us, and would actually get on the phone when we were conducting tests. When we determined we were going to change tubes, we tried changing exciters, drivers, a few other things first. And then we went to a different manufacturer for the tube, and that resolved the issue. And they were actually there monitoring when we changed it out. So it's a hit and miss situation. All I can say is you have to, the more you cooperate, but be firm with these folks, because if you say, look, I'll do this, this, and this, but you're going to have to reimburse me because we're operating legally, be sure you're legal first before you do anything else. And usually they will either spend some money or they will just go away because they know that minus 80 dB rule. But the problem is the commission opened the barn door on this whole issue and really are not backing up the broadcasters. They'll back up the wireless companies quicker than anything else. So it is a problem.
John, Sam writes, it's always double the transmitter frequency of the STL. Have you seen that too?
I really haven't on any of the STLs. I've lost some STLs and we don't know why. But I have not. There's so many different bands that the wireless companies are working on, and in different areas. So I really suspect, not to put panic in anybody, but the STL band as we know it, the 940 to 960 megahertz, will probably end up going away and be acquired by wireless before it's all over with. But normally for the for FM, it's a seventh harmonic, and again, double the frequency of the STL. But again, it depends on what the wireless company is and what kind of equipment they have at that particular site.
Okay. And Ray sends a note here that says Chomerics, it's CHOMERICS, has a very large selection of EMI and RFI sealing products. So if you're looking for that, it'd be a good idea to take a look at their website. Thank you, Ray.
Yeah, the one situation that I ran into one time, and the guys were really, when we talked to them about it, they sort of understood it. Their spectrum analyzer, since they were trying to read signals so low, which is actually way below the 80 dB part that we use in broadcasting, was that the RF from the transmitter was just overloading the spectrum analyzer. And you know what happens when you overload a spectrum analyzer? You'll actually get all kind of spurs.
Well, and I think you have to remember too, a lot of the field techs that they send out don't necessarily have spectrum analyzers with the attenuators that they are necessary, and you really need to be able to not only be able to pass the frequency that you're measuring, you need to be able to block everything else around it. And like you say, I've seen them show up with a spectrum analyzer and hook up an FM Yagi antenna to it and point it up in the air at the transmitter standing 30 feet away. Well, guess what? You're gonna overload the front end of the spectrum analyzer and get all kind of crazy readings. So that's something you really have to watch. I found in a couple of the cases it's good to bring in a quote unquote consulting engineer that has a good track record, especially in some experience with the wireless companies, because even if you're well qualified in using spectrum analyzers, they sometimes have they feel better dealing with somebody that says consulting engineer behind their name. It's just the way the wireless companies operate. So
having that PE after their name does mean something. So
yes.
you're right.
John, while you're on with us, we were talking earlier, and I figured you had gone to fill up your coffee cup again. But we were talking about safety at the transmitter, and we mentioned, or I mentioned that a story that you related one time, and you might share the story about people forgetting to put the panel back on the distribution.
Oh,
AC
yes.
panel.
I see that a lot in doing ABIPs. And actually, I had a little emergency down at the college radio station. Somebody had not pushed a button. Um, um, I had a case, actually, it was in South Carolina where I went to a site, and the engineer unlocked the door and said, "Oh, the light switch is right to the right." And of course, I reach in, and something stopped me, and I stepped on in and looked. And yes, the light switch was right there, but right butt up next to the light switch was the disconnect breaker panel, and had no cover on it. So you could have very easily, I could have just stuck my hand right in there looking for the light switch in semi-dark and lit myself up. And I would say 30% of the sites that I go to, especially if I'm doing due diligence or something like that, I find, especially at the transmitter site, panel covers are sitting on the floor and the boxes are wide open. And not only is that a hazardous to individuals, but again, we're talking about mice and everything else. It's like, hey, I can hop up there and chew on wires, and the next thing you know, dead mouse, dead transmitter, and total darkness in your plant.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I've seen the same thing you have, and I've got some pictures, and I'll send you some copies of them, John. You might use in your workshop. One where somebody had actually connected a wire to the main feed to the top side of the 200 amp disconnect. They took a
Mhm.
wire and screwed it into the insulation ahead of the breaker. Now that just blew me away. That's a safety problem waiting to happen.
Well, it's funny you see these things. I had a customer send me a picture of his disconnect box, and there are two screwdrivers that are in place of the fuses. There were no fuses, and somebody stuck these screwdrivers in to short things out. I mean, having spares, there's a reason why you have spares of fuses, and that you throw the old stuff away. I worked with a guy who kept everything. So there was a drawer of transistors and chips, and you never knew which ones were working and which ones weren't, because he'd take a chip out and he'd throw it in the drawer along with the good chips. So make sure that you get rid of everything that is damaged and that is no longer good, so that it's not something that's going to give you a problem. But having those spares, the fuses, especially the larger fuses that you can't get at CVS or 7-Eleven or someplace like that in the middle of the night. I mean, you've got to really have those available. So important for you to stock up on those kind of things. And Larry, that's something once, I did it once a year, but you don't have to do it any more often than that. Is to come up with a fuse inventory, especially for the larger fuses for your transmitter disconnects, if they use those, and listing all of the fuses that you have in all of your sites, and then go ahead and do a bulk order of buying all of those replacement ones, and then keeping them at the transmitter sites so that you know that you've got what you need. You're not looking for a 10 amp fuse, but you can only find a 5 amp fuse, and you install that and hope that that's going to work. You want to replace them with the same fuses, and make sure that you have all that stuff on hand.
Spare parts are very important, especially at 2 a.m. in the morning when something's out and you can't find the right one. I know when I first got into television, or I worked at the studio for several years, and then they moved me down to the transmitter, and my job at the transmitter was to go through the inventory room, parts inventory room, and get them all organized and see what we were missing, because they had a replacement for everything that was in that old RCA transmitter. It was a big room, and it took me a couple of weeks, I think, to go through all that and inventory it. But as you say, 2 o'clock in the morning, if the transmitter's off and you need a relay or you need a fuse and you don't have it, there you go.
Well, and that was it. And you know, I was taught early on, and this was a really neat lesson, was if you had to buy a transmitter part, a replacement part, always buy two. And, you know, the idea being, well, if it went out once, it's probably going to go out again, and at least you'll have it on the shelf. And this is especially true if you don't have a stock of parts for the transmitter. It can get kind of costly, but, you know, it's one of those things. Do they want to be on the air, or do they want to spend the money for that? So we'll see what they have. Ray has another note here that Microwave Filter Company will make custom FM channel reject filters for about $50. Very deep notch at your FM channel, and that might help things out if there's an issue with interference.
Yeah, they do a good
John.
job on making those filters, especially for use with spectrum analyzers. You could get away with about a set of 3 or 4, and some of them they have are actually tunable in the field.
Very good. And the website for the Comerics was https Crayden, KRAYDEN.com, and then enter in Comerics, CHOMERICS, in the search box to get that. Regarding interference, a note here from Bob Henning saying he had a situation where there was a site that had built a Faraday cage around their older transmitter. ATT was pretty happy after that. And that comes back to the paint that Larry was talking about that's impregnated with the copper. It kind of gives you a Faraday shield around the entire transmitter building.
Yeah, I haven't used it, but I've talked to a couple of people that actually did, and they got the cell company actually pay it. It's sort of expensive, I think, but the cell company actually paid for it, and apparently it cleared up the problem. Well, John, I appreciate you being with us. We sort of run over a little bit, but that's fine. Again, give the address, email address where they can submit any kind of things that you might want to put in the workbench.
Sure, that would be great. Real simple. My name, and make sure that you have the P in the middle. My cousin, who lives in New Zealand, and he gets lots of mail for John Bisset and does not like it. So make sure it's JOHN, the letter P, BISSET, 2 S's and 1 T. So John P. Bisset at gmail.com will get your submission to me, and pictures are always desired. We'll use those and give you credit for them. The pictures should be sent as high a resolution as possible. We typically need at least 250 to 300 kilobits to get the publishing people happy. But yeah, we'd be real happy to get those too. And use your camera, as was mentioned earlier. Take lots of pictures, and maybe set up a picture in your lunchroom at the station of just weird things at the transmitter site. Let them see what an exploded capacitor looks like, or let them see the dead mouse or the snake that crawled across the high voltage transformer. You know, these people have no idea what a transmitter site is. Many of them have never even been to one. They don't even know. So by you educating them, it helps them, and it also helps you. And if I can help you with anything, please be free to give me a holler on my email. Be glad to help you. And thank you for those of you that are Telos customers. We really appreciate that.
All right. Thank you very much, John. We appreciate it. John
My pleasure.
George, you have any more comments, John?
No, always a great session with John Bisset, and one of these days I'll drive down to Charleston. We can get together for lunch. So, but we'll see each other in a few weeks out at the NAB, and hopefully we'll see a good many of you at the NAB coming up in the middle part of April.
It'll be good. That sounds great. I hope you guys will be out there.
All right. And speaking of the NAB, because of the NAB next month, we will not have a webinar because it falls on the same week as the NAB. So we will not have a webinar scheduled for April, but we will start back up in May. And you see there on the screen, the date will be May 16th. If you want to watch this one again or any of our other webinars that we have done over the past several years, just go to YouTube and search for ABA Engineering Academy, and you'll see them all listed there. So we appreciate everybody being with us, and we will see you again in May on May 16th. Thanks for being with us.